Is the uranium bear market finally over? During this short little video, I'm going to lay out some evidence, some current events, some news stories, along with my opinion and analysis about the uranium market, about why I think the uranium bear market is either about to end in the near future or has already ended. There's been past experts. One of the biggest uranium bulls out there was Rick Roll. Rick's a very smart guy. His long-term track record over his 30-something year career is extremely good, but one of his worst ever calls, besides geothermal being very early on that, was on uranium. And I respect Rick a lot, but, you know, he was bullish on uranium. I think he's been bullish on uranium for over a decade. And I have here a chart on the TSX of the Uranium Participation Corporation, symbol U. You can look this up. And this is a 10-year chart of the uranium price. And this tracks the uranium price. I think it stores and holds unrefined uranium. And so this is the long-term chart of the uranium price. But if you actually go... And there was an attempt, you know, in 2011 for the uranium bull market to restart around there where I'm moving my mouse over on the chart, but that was Fukushima. So there was an attempt to restart the bull market after a long bear market, and then it went back into enormous bear market again after Fukushima. Okay, so let me show you the short-term charts on this first. So, you know, there's been attempts after low prices here, attempts at re-breaking out and then back low again, and an attempt to re-break out recently too. And so one of the reasons that I think that this uranium price is unsustainable is if you listen to Rick Roll and other experts who know this market very well, and yes, he's gotten the price wrong about it, but he's very familiar with the mining companies, with their fundamentals, their balance sheets, the cost to mine uranium, is that a lot of these uranium miners are now losing $40 a pound mining uranium. So they're selling it at a loss. So this is very unsustainable. Let's go to some of the current event stories that kind of prove my point here that uranium is facing a supply crunch. One of the largest uranium suppliers in the world, Kazatomprom, earlier this year in January, they plan to produce 10% less uranium. So they've been cutting back on supply. They cut one of their largest mines in the world. I'll provide a link to all these things that I'm going to talk about. So basically, I'm going to go through, summarize some of these additional news stories here as well. We have Areva, which is a vertically integrated large uranium miner, but they also build nuclear power plants, and they also recycle spent uranium fuel rods, and they also do, I think, refining as well. And they've cut back a lot on their large uranium mines in Niger. And this was from October of this year. So they're cutting back. The other large one is Cameco. For our Canadian listeners who are familiar with Cameco, I believe on their symbol CCJ, they're another vertically integrated company. They have two absolutely enormously large uranium mines in McArthur River and Cigar Lake. The Cigar Lake mine had flooding problems for many years, but it was a high grade and low cost. Now that it's online, it was a higher cost to bring it online than it should have been. But anyways, though, the largest producing uranium mine in the world, McArthur River, accounted for 11% of annual uranium production in 2016. Cameco just announced they're going to shut it down for 10 months. And they expect this to help end the uranium bear market. Cameco CEO on Business News Network, I will attach links to this. He did interviews recently in the last couple weeks. And he was basically saying he wants to shut down 40% of all his total output at Cameco, even though they're vertically integrated and they do use a good amount of their own mining supply to fuel their own nuclear power plants. But he's saying he sees no compelling reason to invest even a dime in new production or exploration. So this is an industry where, like I said, almost all the uranium miners are losing enormous amounts of money producing the uranium at current prices, and it's just not sustainable in the long term for all the largest producers in the world, your Kazatoproms, your Arevas, your Camecos, the other producers, to continue to produce the same amount of uranium and lose lots and lots of money on it. And so I think one of the reasons is because of Fukushima, that Japan did not restart a lot of their nuclear power plants like a lot of people thought they were going to only a couple years after Fukushima. I think they've only restarted 2 or 3 total nuclear power plants, and they have dozens. So Japan had kept an enormous stockpile of uranium supply to refine it into fuel rods. And so they flooded after Fukushima, not too long after Fukushima in 2011, they flooded the market. They've been basically enormous sellers, and flooding the market with excess supply for at least 5 years now. And Japan has been doing that. And the other reason is China was supposed to have built a lot of nuclear power plants already, and Fukushima made the Chinese slow and delay a lot of projects and stop and rethink. And then you have a lot of European nuclear power plants that are either being phased out or shut down. One of the main reasons nuclear power plants are not getting built at the speed that they were maybe in the past, although China still has plans to build a lot of them, is that they're extremely expensive upfront capital costs. So you're looking at well over $1 billion, perhaps like well over $3 billion to build a nuclear power plant before you start to, if you're a private sector company, before you start to get any return on your investment, start to get that capital paid back. So it's the highest upfront cost of any real viable power source right now for baseload electricity. So Rick Rule in the long term is right that the current nuclear power plants will need to replace their spent fuel rods. But, you know, they've been delaying this. There's been a lot of excess supply that has hit the market, but this is not sustainable. There's been a lot of consolidation in the industry. There's been bankruptcies. There's been companies, you know, selling off assets just to survive. There's the company called Denison, and that's backed by the billionaire resource investor Lucas Lundin and his family. So Denison is not as large as your Camecos, your Rivas, those types of companies, your Kazatoproms, but they're backed by a billionaire. So they will probably survive. They have a very, there's been a lot of discovery also of very high-grade uranium in the Athabasca Basin up in Canada. And so there's a lot of potential there. And I think, you know, some of these uranium juniors are very interesting because they're really cheap. And unlike, you know, the uranium, UEC, Uranium Energy Corporation, which is Amir Nani, that stock was, you know, heavily pumped. Rick Rule loved that stock. He's actually keeping that company alive on life support now. They had $19 million in loans that they owed to Sprott Inc. I read the full annual report a couple years ago, and they delayed the repayment of the loan. So the company, is kind of a zombie company that Rick Rule is kind of keeping alive, in my opinion. And because they tried to, they thought they were going to be a low-cost producer, and, you know, they took on all this debt to open up mines, and then, you know, the uranium price just kept going lower and lower and lower. And even though they were a pretty low-cost producer, because the uranium price was in a bear market, they couldn't make a profit, and they had all this debt. So it's not just me who has a bearish opinion on Uranium Energy Corporation, that basically Rick Rule is keeping alive out of his good graces, and the people at Sprott are, but it's also a lot of stock analysts too who are covering Uranium Energy Corporation. I believe the stock has lots of sell recommendations, and that's when people look over the balance sheet. But do your own due diligence there. I know there's a good amount of my listeners who are speculating on Uranium Energy Corporation still because they see the ads for that company on a YouTube video. I would avoid that company. I would rather own you know, larger companies that at least have some cash flow right now, and if they have to, they can sell assets to survive, like a Cameco or an Areva or a Denison, because Denison's backed by billionaire Lucas Lundin, and they have some really good exploration success up in the Athabasca Basin. Also, I wanted to point out too, before I go, in this short little video, the Energy Report, which is free, they actually cover the uranium market pretty well, and I'll attach a link to this, and you can search uranium companies. And on here, you know, they have some of those juniors up in the Athabasca Basin who are not, you know, blowing through cash like crazy, who haven't taken on debt on the balance sheet to try to build a mine, but they are drilling and they are hitting high-grade uranium. So when this bear market does end, these companies will be, the ones that survive will be beneficiaries. So obviously these are higher risk, but they are hitting high-grade intercepts up in the Athabasca Basin, and a couple of them are Energy Fuels Inc., Fission Uranium Corp., and Next Generation Energy. So I think there's a couple others. This is just a simple uranium search on this website. I'll attach a link to all of this. So what do you think about the uranium market right now? Do you think the bear market is close to ending because of the massive production cuts from the world's largest uranium miners? Do you think the global economy is, because it's not getting better, especially in China and other countries, do you think because the global economy is not getting better, do you think a lot of these governments don't want to make the investments, which I mentioned the CapEx is very, very high to build nuclear power plants. And then also, you know, there's the potential problems that you have with Fukushima or 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl. So in general, a lot of nuclear power plants are very safe, but you have the case with Fukushima and some of the others I mentioned, where despite the costs that were invested, there were corners cut at those nuclear power plants. Those accidents could have easily been prevented. I've heard from people that visited Fukushima 10, 20 years before the accident happened in 2011, that they knew that there were problems with the backup systems, with the diesel generators and the backup systems. The electrical system for the diesel generators, it was not, I believe, on a separate system. And so they knew that these problems existed, the TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power, and others, and so they had tried to cut corners to save money. And, you know, obviously with nuclear power, you can't really do that. But there is a lot better long-term, there is a lot better nuclear power technology. I'm a big proponent of Lifter liquid fluoride molten salt thorium reactor. There's thorium remixes and other videos on YouTube. There's Kirk Sorensen. But basically, from speaking with Kirk Sorensen, people at the Department of Energy are not going to allow Lifter. They're not going to approve anything in the United States. So it's going to be almost impossible to get Lifter. The accelerated development in the United States is going to have to occur in another country, like maybe China or another country, unfortunately. And I think, you know, Lifter has a lot of potential. The technology should have already been proven out in the 60s and 70s. Small demonstration plant was already run for, I believe, over a year back then. And then they canceled all the funding and project, and they took it. They took all the mentions of the Lifter technology out of the textbooks for training nuclear engineers and nuclear physicists. It's just really sad. A lot of corruption. You know, a lot of big military industrial complex, because you're using thorium instead of plutonium or uranium, then you can't make nuclear weapons out of it. It's a lot harder. So I think that was one of the considerations. So what do you guys think about the uranium market? I mean, obviously this is not sustainable for a uranium price, a 10-year uranium price, to keep going lower and lower and lower, unless on the demand side, you know, a lot of these nuclear power plants are going to be totally phased out. I want to get this point across, though, before I finish this video. I do really respect Rick Rule. I think he's a brilliant guy. His 30-year track record is outstanding, but, you know, he's definitely been wrong on the uranium market for 10 years. It's not all his fault, per se, because I don't know if anyone could have legitimately seen, you know, that the Fukushima disaster was guaranteed to happen in 2011 and it was going to cause all the problems. It's still causing problems. And, you know, unfortunately, I think there's still other potential Fukushimas out there, either in the United States or Japan, because there was a lot of corners cut at some of these nuclear power plants. Wall Street for Main Street needs your help. Since the middle of 2016, YouTube continues to increasingly censor and sabotage the growth and success of my channel with dramatically slower or no subscriber growth, a huge decrease in views per month compared to 2016, and well over $10,000 lost in Google AdSense revenues the last 18 months. I should have been way over 20,000 subscribers and way over 3 million views last year, but it feels like I am Sisyphus trying to roll a heavier boulder with more and more additional weight up a steeper and steeper hill. In the last few weeks, all of my videos have been set to demonetization by default, and I have to manually protest each video. This is in addition to even lower than usual Google AdSense revenues after the adpocalypse started over a year ago for me. This has also affected my ability to get paid advertisers to agree to deals not involving YouTube, as I lost $3,000 per month in paid advertising deals at the end of June 2017 because all my analytics are down a lot thanks to YouTube censorship algorithms that have intentionally kneecapped the growth of my channel. With YouTube / Google / Alphabet / Don't Be Evil strongly considering demonetizing or setting all libertarian, conservative, or pro-Trump content to private to prevent any sharing or monetization, it is imperative I have a contingency plan to figure out how to make a living off my content. Each 30 to 40 minute video takes a few hours of my time before it's released to the public. There's a strong possibility that in the near future, YouTube will force me to move all or almost all my content to a new video upload website that allows free speech or behind a paywall on my own website. Thanks if you have already made a one-time or recurring monthly donation, and thanks in advance for any future donations as I decide the future of my channel and what to do with my content going forward. We accept one-time donations on the Wall Street for Main Street website via PayPal, Bitcoin, or Gold Money. You can also become a monthly Patreon contributor for $1 or more a month if you want to help me out. And don't forget to like each video on YouTube and share it with your friends and family if you think they would like the content.